Sudbury City Council to order. For the first time in a very long 18 months, General Committee is being held in the council chambers at City Hall, with members of General Committee, some members of the Executive Management, and the City Clerk in attendance. Senior leadership team and staff who have reports on tonight's agenda, as always, will be available to answer questions via video conference. The council chambers will remain closed to the public until further notice, and there are obviously some changes that have been made here to ensure a safe environment here in the chambers, but I have to say it is really good to be back. Tonight's General Committee meeting is also being broadcast on Rogers TV and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel at youtube.com/user cityberry. Okay, first item on the agenda, as always, is the consent agenda. For the consent items, I'll read out the title associated with the recommended motions from the staff reports and the items for discussion. Please ask that the item be held if you wish further debate for it tonight, and don't forget to use your mic. If the item is not held, the motion that's printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent. There will be no further discussion tonight. Recommendations from tonight's GC meeting will be considered at the next City Council meeting, which is next Monday. So, on tonight's consent agenda, we'll go through the staff reports first. The first staff report is the approval of our water asset management plan. Can somebody hold that? Hold it until. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. We'll hold that as that's the subject of the presentation tonight. Next, we have the Downtown Barrie BIA financial commitments. No holds on that. That is approved on consent, and that is an agreement with the BIA surrounding the Meridian Place and Dunlop Streetscape projects. Next, we have the Brine Drive Transportation Improvements, Harvey Road to Kaplan Avenue. No holds on that. That's a significant one as well. That's the property agreement to allow the connection of Brine Drive in the south end. So that will go forward to council. It's been approved on consent. Finally, we have the residential rental licensing or absentee landlord pilot project and draft bylaw. No holds. That is approved on consent. We'll go forward to council next week. And of course, the costs associated with that are subject to the budget. We have three items for discussion that have been placed by members of council tonight. The first is investigation into parking restrictions on Blake Street, placed by Councillor Riepma. No holds on that. That is approved. Next, we have an investigation into parking restrictions on Cuthbert Street in Ward 6, placed by Councillor Natalie Ayres. No holds on that. It is approved. Finally, we have the Performing Arts Center Task Force funding for expenditures, put on by Councillor Jim Harris. No holds on that. Okay, the items for discussion have been approved on consent. The only thing that was held is the Water Asset Management Plan, and that is the subject of the presentation General Committee will now be receiving, and I will hand it over to Kelly Oakley, our Manager of Corporate Asset Management, to provide the presentation. Ms. Oakley, who is joining us remotely.
Hello, members of committee. I think I can see you now.
We can see you and hear you. Welcome.
Wonderful. Okay, next step is to successfully share my screen. And do you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Good evening to you and members of General Committee. Thank you for having me here this evening. This is the third asset. Oh, I have to advance my slide. Sorry. Click. This is the third asset management plan presentation council has received this year. Excuse me. We talked about stormwater and transportation in the spring, and this evening we focus on the city's water assets. We'll do a bit of a reminder on some asset management key principles before discussing specifics about the water assets and the service they provide. And I just wanted to note this presentation and the associated staff report also serve to advance the city's objectives by keeping us in compliant with Ontario asset management regulations. The city owns over $5 billion worth of assets. That includes water assets we're discussing through this presentation, and also things like roads, sewers, facilities, and fleet. These assets allow the city to deliver a wide range of services to residents, businesses, and visitors. Asset management is about understanding the risks and costs associated with providing service, informed decisions about how to spend capital and operating budgets. At the city, every group and department is doing asset management every day, even if we don't always call it that. Frontline operations teams completing repairs, office staff assessing asset condition data, and members of council discussing budgets are all making decisions are all examples of asset management planning. The corporate asset management team works with other departments to help implement best management practices and to make strategic decisions. We're leading the preparation of asset management plans to document this work and again also to comply with Ontario regulations. I went backwards, didn't I? There we go. So specifically around the city's water assets and water service, the city is committed to ensuring the supply of safe drinking water to its residents and visitors. Water is also critical for fire protection. The city is able to deliver this service through a combination of surface and groundwater wells, water mains, and many other assets, with a total replacement cost of $1.3 billion. The majority of the $1.3 billion is the distribution network, that is the water mains that bring water directly to your door, and also the surface water treatment plant. One of the large pressures that we face in keeping our water assets in good condition, while we also plan for the expansion of our network to prepare for the growth and intensification that is coming. An important factor in how we manage our assets is to understand what their condition is. And age is a really useful indicator of condition, particularly for buried assets like water mains that we can't easily inspect. So one of the things this graph indicates is that although we have a lot of new and middle-aged water assets now, we should prepare ourselves for the future as this large cohort of infrastructure built over the last couple of decades ages together and eventually requires replacement. One of the values of asset management plans is that we can look ahead and plan for this need. While we can learn a lot from the age of our assets, we can go a step further to understanding their condition. We can inspect assets that we can physically see, and even though we can't see some assets like water mains below ground, we have data to help us understand their condition. As an example, the city tracks every water main break, and we also know that some water main materials are more susceptible to breaks than others. So using this information, we can predict the condition of our water mains. This graph is for all water assets, and the red and orange bars represent the assets in poor and very poor condition. The 2% in very poor condition are the city's oldest water mains, several chambers, a few water meters, and a number of other assets. And these assets all need attention. However, this graph also shows that the majority of our assets are in good to very good condition. And that means the city has time to plan for the future. So data about our assets is used to assess the level of service that we're providing. And the provincial asset management regulation prescribes some key metrics that the city must use to measure levels of service. And we're free to supplement with other measures that help us manage our service. This slide shows the mandated metrics and Barrie's performance against them. You can see that the city is providing good service with safe, reliable drinking water and fire protection. As an asset management best practice, the city should establish our target levels of service for the future, or our proposed levels of service. Everything the city does should be linked to the service we want to provide. And there is a direct connection between how we spend on assets and our service levels. Council can choose to adjust service levels by setting priorities and allocating budgets. If we underinvest, service levels drop and risks increase. And while we're very unlikely to reduce service levels around things like water quality, underinvestment could mean that more assets fail or they take longer to fix, making interruption of service an issue. If we want to increase our service level and reduce risk, then we need to appropriately resource and invest there also. For this asset management plan, the city looked to the future and establishment of target levels of service. Again, for a service such as water, which is heavily regulated, there are only a few differences between the existing and proposed level of service. But importantly, the asset management plan considers whether these proposed levels of service are achievable. So what life cycle activities are needed to achieve them and how much those activities will cost. And when there is insufficient funding, the city must make choices about what activities to undertake and understand the risks so that they can be mitigated. Putting together our understanding of our assets, the level of service, and the future funding needs, we're able to summarize what the financial implications might be. Looking after what we own is always a priority. Focusing on the red dashed line, this graph shows the average annual spending needs to renew our existing water assets over the next 10 years. These needs are primarily, these assets are primarily assets that were built several decades ago, including some of the original water infrastructure in the city. The city actually has some water mains that are over 100 years old, and don't worry, those are prioritized for replacement in the capital plan. The solid black line then represents the average investment in water asset renewal through our 2021 capital plan. And the difference, or the infrastructure gap, is $2.2 million per year. Now let's move to the purple line. Thinking back a few slides to the graph that showed when the water assets were built, 80% of our water assets were built in the last 3 decades. These assets won't require significant repair or replacement for a number of years, but when they do need investment, it will be a lot all at once. Considering the full life cycle renewal needs over the long term, the average annual investment for water assets would be $25 million per year. And if funding continues at our current level, the infrastructure gap will grow significantly into our future. The city has a robust network of transmission water mains and a plant with available capacity. Therefore, there is still some investment required to service growth. The projected cost is an average $10 million per year, and this is the red dashed line on the graph. The infrastructure gap, represented again here by the difference between the red dashed and solid black lines, shows a relatively small infrastructure gap, indicating that our capital plan is keeping pace with needs to service growth. We've discussed before that the pace of growth in the secondary plan areas has been slower than expected, and so DC revenue to pay for these improvements is also lagging. As the growth picks up, our investment will need to match that pace to close the gap. And it should be noted that while DCs pay for a significant portion of the new and upgraded assets, there is still a portion of the funding that comes from rates. Operations and maintenance is everything from proactive flushing of water mains, exercising valves, and monitoring our treatment systems, to reactive activities like repairing water main breaks. As the city grows, we take on more assets, and our operating and maintenance budgets must keep pace. And that means more than just addressing inflation. This third graph shows an existing gap on the O&M budget that will grow over time if we continue to increase budgets at an assumed rate of 2% versus a 2.8% pace of growth. And this final graph shows all 3 of the previous data sets combined. This is the total cost of providing the water service and shows an average gap of just over $6 million per year over the next 10 years. As discussed, over the longer term, our investment needs for renewal will increase significantly. Underinvesting, whether it's in renewal, growth, or operating and maintenance needs, impacts the city's service levels. Provision of safe drinking water is one of the city's most essential services. The city provides safe, clean drinking water and at a good level of service. There's a direct connection between the service level we provide to the public and how much we invest. And through our work on this water asset management plan, we've quantified the underinvestment in water assets, which will result in reduced levels of service over time. This means more interruptions to service and more money spent on emergency repairs rather than proactive maintenance. And as our young assets age, we must be prepared for increased pressures. So asset management is an evolving process. As we continue to refine our data and better understand our assets, we gain an even better picture of what is needed and when. And this information is key to informing future capital operating budgets, as well as the city's long-range financial planning efforts. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions, as well as other staff that are here this evening.
Thanks very much, Ms. Oakley. I will go to members of General Committee for questions, and I would just ask right now, are you available to answer questions on the plan itself as well as the presentation while we've got you up on the screen?
Yes, absolutely. I will just note that I've stopped sharing my screen so that I can pull my copy of the plan up in front of me in case you have questions about specific pages. But I can pull those back up as required.
That's great. Thank you. Questions, members of General Committee? Councillor Jim Harris.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Ms. Oakley. Thank you, Ms. Oakley, for the presentation. My question relates to the plan. I was just curious. It's about the community objectives on table E1, proposed water service objectives and measures. And I was curious about, and I'm sure residents would be curious about, affordability, probably at the height of most people's minds as far as reliability. But what caught my attention was under the objective, it says services are affordable, provide at the lowest cost for both current and future customers, but the measures seemed different. They seemed to focus on the capacity is adequately funded and reliability is adequately funded in short term. So I was kind of curious how those relate to reducing or making sure it's affordable for current and future customers. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of committee, I would say that the purpose of the asset management plan is to look at the needs over the long term, whether we're appropriately investing and intergenerational equity. And then I would say that, in separate documents that the city and initiatives that the city undertakes, for example, the long range financial plan and our financial control policies, we talk about affordability in terms of what percentage of, and I'll probably get the measures wrong, and our finance team could correct me, but what portion of average household income is allocated to various rates and taxes and things. So the city does address those things. They're perhaps just not explicitly addressed in the asset management plan itself.
Okay, thank you. I think that was what I was wondering, because I couldn't see how the objective in the description was, I couldn't see that in the report, but I understand in your presentation was really clear in the infrastructure, the gap of so many million per year, and does that seem to be more in line with the service measures that are here as noted with the funded in short term and the funded in the reliability funding? Is that where that fits more so than the impact on affordability for current and future customers? Hope that made sense.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris, I think that makes sense, and yes, I believe you're correct.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Mine's also on the report itself. On page 48, there's a map that shows potential fire flow capacity risk. It's a little hard to read, but it suggests that the listed areas as having fire flow capacity below the required fire flow. Most of them are in the downtown area. There's actually a few scattered elsewhere, including some in my ward. So the report says if these segments have not been expanded already, the city may consider further capacity analysis of these segments. So I guess first of all, is there a risk? Is this a serious issue? And what's the next step?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward and members of committee. The city undertakes water modeling that identifies theoretical flows throughout the city. And certainly we always have the opportunity to improve that data by undertaking actual measurements in the field. And so right now our model has identified that there are potential issues in these areas. And if we're unable to prioritize a capital project to address those issues, then we can undertake field testing to actually confirm the significance of the deficiency if it exists. There is fire flow available in those areas at this time.
Okay, so thank you. So it is being done then. kind of further studies are being done or will be done.
Correct, Deputy Mayor Ward. We're regularly updating our water model and looking at these whenever we identify projects for the capital plan. This is one of the areas that we look at when we're identifying those sort of high priority projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Oakley, thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions and trying to manage some assumptions. And the first one is, when I look at the documentation that identifies the unknown component of the condition of our current assets being about 4.5%, or if I'm rounding up, 60 million, is it safe to assume that it's unknown because of the historical nature of that infrastructure? And can I assume that this is a lot of the underground infrastructure that's probably in the northeast end of the city?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, you would be correct. It's mainly an issue with lack of historical data. Some of the infrastructure is so old that we don't have an accurate record of when it was constructed. And so, yes, it's primarily, it's safe to assume that it is the oldest infrastructure.
And follow up, Your Worship. When I look at the detail in the documentation that talks a bit about the renewal backlog for water assets, to me it's tying it to those that we classify as very poor. So the $25.6 million in assets that are very poor. Where does the unknown component fit with our forecasted financial planning? So that $60 million that's tied to the unknown, that I would assume these are going to be more emergency or urgent situations. Are we dealing with that future cost in a different way around our financial planning or around our reserves so we can respond to those? I wasn't sure how that financial amount is incorporated into our reserves or our planning.
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Kungle. We have made assumptions. You're correct in that some of the assets where we don't know the age, we also don't know the condition, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. We have made assumptions for when those assets will need to be replaced, the 60 million is a lot of money, but compared to the overall costs of the entire portfolio, we do consider that the needs we've identified are correct at an order of magnitude. And certainly we've identified that refining our data and making improvements there is a really, really good opportunity for us in order to provide better data for the future.
Thank you. So lastly, I guess I would say, are you saying that 60 million has been incorporated into the forecasting and the recommendations around the amount of funding needed to alleviate the gaps around projected need over time?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Oakley.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To Ms. Oakley, do you have any recommendations for City Council in terms of policy that we can make different or shape in a different trajectory to reduce that gap and make sure that it's funded properly?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. The asset management plan, as you probably noticed, doesn't get into a lot of detail around strategies. It talks about increasing investment and the needs there. But I know that you've recently received a long-range financial plan presentation from a consultant, and our finance team will be bringing a report shortly. That, as well as the water wastewater financial plan that was presented to you in the spring, both I believe recommend increasing rates and increasing contributions to reserves so that we can build those reserves to address these future funding needs, the existing and future funding needs.
Would staff be able to come up with a efficiency metric in terms of growth as it relates to water? And I'll flesh it out a bit. So when you build a pipe, if there's 20 homes for a specific size of pipe, there's a cost to it. But if you are increasing the number of units along that pipe, aka increasing density, it's likely going to be a lower per unit cost. Not necessarily, because when you increase density to a certain point, you need a different kind of pipe. But would it be possible for staff to get us that data? And the reason I'm asking is there's, especially since we got that report from Watson, some people feel that growth should pay for growth. Some people feel that growth doesn't pay for growth. I said it before and I'll say it again, not all growth is equal. So if we are equipped with the ability to know what kind of growth is giving us a neutral, AKA getting us to where we are already, what kind of growth is positive, aka giving us a little bit more extra money to cover that deficit, and what kind of growth is actually in the short term, medium, and long term increasing our deficit and making this gap unsustainable, it would be important metrics for City Council to consider as it considers not only that report coming back from staff, but as well as the OP. So back to you, I guess, from a staff perspective, are we able to get a metric in terms so we can assign an efficiency value to growth as it affects water, our water operations?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. Certainly, that type of analysis is undertaken when the city does master planning. And once this latest version of the OP is approved, our very next step in our Managing Our Growth Studies program will be to embark on updating our master plans. And we'll be looking at the new growth numbers out to 2051 and thinking about what intensification targets are set out in the OP, what that means in terms of infrastructure. And there are opportunities to look at scenarios as that type of work progresses. I'm not sure that I could provide you with a metric in the shorter term, but certainly it's something that we can think about as we embark on our next phase of planning.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the answer. The reason I was hoping we could get that metric before the OP is that metric, at least to me, will influence the OP, right? Once the OP is there, we can't really change, I guess, until a future OP. And we're kind of doing, in my opinion, backwards, where we're saying, okay, this is the impact it's going to have on water infrastructure. And we're now being responsive instead of proactive, where if we had that metric, it would, hopefully, it's a very valuable piece of data and would influence both staff, the public's perception, and council's decision on how we want to grow as a city. So is your department tied in terms of timeline? If to get that metric, is it resources? What would be the limitation to possibly getting that metric prior to final adoption of the OP?
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Morales. Certainly, the details of the modeling work plan, I would have to follow up with staff who are the experts in that area to understand, specifically the timelines that it would take. I think part of it would be certainly the time before City Council approves the OP, because I understand that's coming up fairly soon. And there are a number of scenarios, I guess, that could be analyzed, and the more factors that you throw in, the more complex that discussion takes.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Thank you, Ms. Oakley, for the presentation. My question is from page 61 of the report, I guess 74 if we're on our laptops. So under levels of service and other opportunities in red, it says acquire a comprehensive modeling system that will enable determination of proposed performance for each year of the 10-year planning period. Just wondering, have you already investigated
on our laptops,
a possible modeling system?
So
and is that
under
something that
levels of service and other opportunities in red, it says
acquire a comprehensive modeling system that will enable
Through
determination.
you, Mayor Lehman. Sorry, Councillor Harris, could you give me that page reference again? I'm scrolling, and I just want to make sure I land on the right
Have
page.
you already investigated a possible modeling system?
So
is that something that
levels of service and
other
presentation
opportunities in red, it
pages,
says
it's,
acquire a comprehensive modeling
74.
system that will enable
Through
determination.
you, Mayor Lehman. Sorry, Councillor Harris, could you give me that page reference again? I'm scrolling, and I just want to make sure I land on the right
Have
page.
you already investigated
Through your Mayor Leland to Councillor Harris, the city doesn't currently have an asset management enterprise system that we use to could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling and sorry, I just want to make sure I'm on the right page. We are doing it on a case by case basis. Through your Mayor Leland to Councillor Harris, using the city doesn't currently tools like Excel and whatever model fries system that we have. For listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling and sorry, I just want to make sure I'm on the right page. We are doing it on a case by case basis. Through your Mayor Leland to Councillor Harris, using the city doesn't currently tools like Excel and whatever model fries system that we have. For listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling and sorry, I just want to make sure I'm on the right page. We are doing it on a case by case basis. Through your Mayor Leland to Councillor Harris, using the city doesn't currently tools like Excel and whatever model fries system that we have. For listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling and sorry, I just want to make sure I'm on the right page. We are doing it through your Mayor Leland. Councillor Harris, using I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model fries the systems that are out there. For listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling and sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland. Data using that. I would say that the city doesn't tools like Excel and whatever model the systems that are out there. I would say for listeners, could you give me that reference again? I'm scrolling sorry, I just want to make sure the asset management service on first doing through your Mayor Leland.
I have one more, but I'm just going to call a 5-minute recess and see if staff can get the audio going out for the public, and then we'll come back at 7:40. So it's 7:34. Come back in 6 minutes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, really? Are they on Zoom or are they on YouTube? Okay. Okay. Do I need to yell or something? Do we need to yell a little bit?
Okay, folks, we'll call the general committee meeting back to order. And I just had a final question or two for Ms. Oakley, if it's possible to get her back. And then we'll move to the staff report. For those watching at home, this is going to take a little adjusting back to the chambers. They're just trying to get Ms. Oakley back up into the meeting.
Oh, Mayor Lehman, I'm in the meeting.
There you are. Okay. Ms. Oakley, just a couple of quick questions. I think with most utilities, whether it's gas or electricity or water, people really only notice it when it's gone. The reliability concern is really around water main breaks. So on it's on page 38 of the PDF is the list of water main breaks that occurred last year. Page 25 of the report itself. And I thought it was very interesting. I know that over the years we've had pipes that were as much as 100 years old, and those would frequently break. Now it looks like there's a couple of suspects that are commonly a problem, pipes that are about 70 years old. Are we catching up at all on the oldest of the pipes that are causing the most breaks and causing the most inconvenience to our residents?
Mayor Lehman, to answer your question, yes, we have made quite a bit of progress through a couple of means. One is we recently have been working on an interim water main replacement program where some of the worst mains in terms of condition, we've been doing some temporary work on them, knowing that the full replacement of the right-of-way isn't coming for a few years. I believe you're aware of our neighborhood renewal program, and that's replacing some of the oldest infrastructure in the city, not just water mains, but full right-of-ways with sewers and roads, etc. Most of the really, really old, really poor condition water mains are in those neighborhood renewal program projects, and many of them are in the city's capital plan. So if they're not already addressed, they are in our 10-year capital plan or just outside of that. Water mains are a really high-risk asset, and so they typically drive the prioritization of a lot of the neighborhoods. And so the neighborhoods that would go ahead of other neighborhoods would be the ones with those really old, poor condition mains.
Okay, thanks very much. My other question on this was around the duration. I mean, there's two metrics we use in the electricity industry to measure blackouts, the length of time. There's frequency and the duration of interruptions. With this, I did note the note in the report that says we didn't have one that lasted longer than 9 hours, which is good news because any longer, well, any length of time is inconvenient. But there was another one here that said less than 1 day. So that seemed different. And I guess the real question I wanted to ask was, why don't we have duration data for a lot of these breaks? It's curious to me that we don't know how long the service is out. Is that because we're not sure when the break actually occurred because it wasn't immediately detectable?
Mayor Lehman, through you, that is possible. If he doesn't mind, I might actually defer that question to Mr. Arania-Sunderen, who is on the call, and his team is responsible for water operations, and he might have more insight into that than I do.
Mr. Arania-Sunderen.
Mayor Lehman, I think the durations, if there is no durations on the table, I think what that means is that there was no service outage. Because sometimes even if there is a break, that doesn't necessarily mean there is an outage. So, the locations on the table where there's no length for the duration, I would say there was no actual outage.
Okay, begs the question. So is that a situation where the service, there's a second pipe or something? It was just in a location where service continued from elsewhere, or the break wasn't bad enough? How does that work?
Yeah, Mayor Lehman, that's correct, because almost every pipe has a loop, and you're able to maintain the service to most locations even when there's a break. Okay,
so there might have been a pressure drop, but still service, something like that. Okay, thanks for that. I mean, one interesting piece of data, and I didn't see it in the report, so just by way of comment on the presentation and the report, would be to know whether we are knocking down the number of breaks. I think that number, to me, is down. I can remember 10 years ago when we were into the 30 and 40 every winter, but I know it's also weather dependent. You get a really bad winter for freeze thaw, and then the shallower pipes can break more often. But it would be good to know that. I think that would allow us to report to our residents whether we're making progress on probably the most obvious example of where asset management affects their service. With that though, Ms. Oakley, thank you very much for the presentation. As always, we're learning a lot about what we own, what is underground, and what helps everybody live their daily lives, and probably goes taken for granted until there's an issue. But we really appreciate the presentation. We can go right into the staff report. Deputy Mayor, item.
I will put it on the floor. I have no further questions.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to ask any further questions on the staff report or on the motion that is printed on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, then I will just call the question on the motion as printed to approve the plan. All those in favor, please indicate. Show of hands. Yeah, no cards. Exactly, eh? And nobody opposed? That carries. Thanks for that. We did not have any other items that were held on tonight's agenda, which means that we are all the way to inquiries, members of General Committee. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have any inquiries of staff?
I have none.
Members of General Committee, any inquiries of staff? Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just read the report from Mr. Hughes about the Allendale train station. Are you going to be commenting on that later on, Mayor Lehman, or is that something we can maybe get some insight from Mr. Hughes?
So you were looking for is Mr. Hughes on tonight's call? Yeah? Okay, go ahead. Councilor McCann, he's on the line.
Mr. Hughes, how you doing?
Sorry. Thank you, through your worship, to Councilor McCann. I am doing well. You had a question?
Thanks. I'm glad to hear that. I just read your email kind of commenting on the update for the Allendale train station. And it is something that I'm sure all council members and the mayor bet. And so I thought maybe you could take the opportunity, if you could maybe give us the Coles notes. And I do apologize for not giving you the heads up earlier, but just read your email now.
Mr. Hughes.
Sure. Through your worship to Councilor McCann and members of the General Committee, the work at the Allendale Historic Train Station is proceeding. We have since, in the last little bit, we've uncovered an old foundation from a previous building that was on the site, built back in 1863. And as part of the work to clear the site, we need to remove that foundation. So that work is proceeding. It will take a little bit of time, and we're working very diligently around that. There have also been a couple questions from the general public about the safety, or how we're protecting the historic train station building. We do have a structural engineer that's working alongside AECOM to ensure that the work that they're doing is not in any way undermining the foundation and is not going to cause any harm to the historic train station.
Mayor Lehman, please. So, best case, worst case scenario. Okay, you feel comfortable giving that explanation now?
Sorry, through your worship to Councilor McCann. So, best case or worst case, as in when the work is going to be finished? Is that what you're asking?
Well, actually, I think the public would probably, when we'd be able to, start getting tenants, having it open to the public. When can we see that building being opened up? Maybe best case, worst case scenario, if you don't mind.
Through your worship to Councilor McCann, that's not something that I would like to put an end date on. We are working with the various First Nations communities and a couple levels of the provincial government to sort through the archaeological work that's on site, with the Bereavement Authority as well. We need to finish the work to clear the site. Then there is a determination needs to be done through the provincial levels of government. So I can't put I don't think it would be appropriate to put a date on it just yet. Certainly we will be into, at this point, I think it's fair to say, we will be into next year sometime.
Well, I can definitely respect that. Thank you, Mr. Hughes.
Thanks, Councilor McCann. Councilor Kungle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. McAlpine. A question that I'm receiving from the public is, as the weather is changing, of course, what is the progress or status of opening up an overnight warming center? And knowing that the city had a bit of a different role last year due to COVID and that, I didn't know if you could advise us, if you know through partners, how that's proceeding and if an overnight warming center is being considered by community partners.
Ms. McAlpine.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. The County of Simcoe, as the provincially designated service manager under the Housing Services Act, is responsible for planning, funding, and managing social housing programs, emergency shelters, and homelessness services within the county and the two separated cities of Barrie and Orillia. They provide funding to local organizations for the operation of emergency shelters, and as you've noted, last year the emergency shelters were constrained in terms of their capacity due to health and safety restrictions. Winter services, that includes food, clothing, and shelter, that are supported by the shelter system are currently under discussion by the county. They've been meeting with the Elizabeth Fry Society, the David Busby Center, Youth Haven, and Salvation Army. And Busby Center advised today that they're putting together a listing of the services that are available, the hours that they're available or days of the week, and where those are located. As they've recently moved some of their services, they're still settling in. but they are anticipating that they would have warming facilities open during the day, they're hoping to start November 15th, and as well as some overnight. Again, that would be subject to some capacity restrictions. So last year, the city's role was to help with that issue. Now with the hotel space and the hope that they'll be able to address more individuals in their facilities at 88 Mulcaster, our role would be strictly from if an extreme weather alert was issued, we would go back to our typical role there.
And quick follow-up, if I may, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. McAlpine. And should myself or members of council get questions from members of the public, is there a lead agency that we should be redirecting individuals to if there are questions about status, timing, and how that will operate?
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Kungle. At this point in time, it's really the 5 different organizations working together. Based on the fact that the Busby Center is putting together the document with the list of services, they may become the lead, but I don't believe they've finalized that yet.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that update.
Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mary Lehman. A follow-up, actually. We are on the same page, Councillor Kunkel, to Ms. McAlpine. Anticipating that capacity issues may be present and all things go well and Busby gets more beds and 88 Mulcaster is great, what would our contingency plan be? Because what I am seeing and hearing as well is that our numbers are up quite a lot. I know we had the option of using the bus terminal last year because it was closed. What are the backup plans? And if there isn't one, or if something that requires funding, maybe we can talk about how we would do that even outside of the county. I'm concerned we still won't have enough with how great the numbers have grown.
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Natalie Harris. The city would provide services in an extreme weather alert that was issued by Environment Canada. That's our typical process. Certainly, depending on the situation, we can look at other facilities. However, last year's operations, where we were open every single night throughout the entire winter, whether or not there was an extreme weather alert, created challenges with our transit system because transit was operating at the same time. So we don't currently have facilities in the downtown core that are suitable for a sheltering system. So there isn't a building and it's not possible to create a structure that would address sheltering requirements at this time.
Thank you. I'll just email you with any some more follow-up. Thanks.
Councillor Morales.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. Ms. McAlpine, has the armory, I don't know what the proper name of it, has that been considered as a warming shelter when it's on non-use nights, to your awareness, understanding?
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Morales. As the county is the lead for this, I'm not sure if they've had that discussion. It's not a city-owned building, so typically their focus is with the shelter providers that they fund, and then they seek assistance outside of that. We have had discussions, or I've had discussions with the county on extreme weather alerts and support for that, which I've indicated the city would address, but not overnight on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know if they have reached out to the Grey and Simcoe Foresters or anyone else about the use of the armories.
Okay, perfect. And final question, Mr. McAlpine. It's my understanding that the service funding agreement between the City of Barrie and the County of Simcoe is up for renewal, renegotiation sometime next year. Is that accurate? I'll just clarify before I keep going.
The current agreement, the end date for it is December 31st, 2022.
Perfect. Is there an opportunity within the scope of the agreement that has to be renegotiated are things such as what Councillor Congo is bringing up, warming stations and social services at is that under consideration of that agreement that's to be renegotiated, or is that apples and oranges, that's something different?
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Morales, the county is funded by the province for only certain services. When social services were downloaded by the province to municipalities, it didn't come with the entire scope of services or funding for that. So it's always a discussion in terms of the service agreement, but it is a tripartite agreement. So it would have to be something that would be amenable to the county, Orillia, and Barrie. And typically when you increase service levels in one area, that increases costs for all the parties, and they would all need to agree to that before you could. So it's certainly, if council wished to provide direction for negotiating the next municipal services agreement, that's something that could be considered. But ultimately, it will be something that the county council and the city of Orillia's council, as well as Barrie's council, will all have to agree on, and something that disproportionately moves costs from one municipality to another may not be something that they can support.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a really good opportunity.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Any other inquiries of staff? Okay, seeing none, announcements. Deputy Mayor Ward.
I have none.
Members of General Committee, any announcements? Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just two quick announcements. The first is about a community cleanup at Milligan's Pond, taking place Saturday, October 30th at 9:30 a.m. and we'll be meeting at Francis Street South, just at Perry Street at the entrance with the sign for the pond. Again, that's Saturday, October 30th at 9:30 a.m. And my second announcement is to draw everyone's attention to the rally that took place here at City Hall and at Meridian Place just this past weekend. The Simcoe County Environmental Youth Alliance organized a climate rally to talk to us as City Council about our greenhouse gas reduction plan that will be coming before us sometime in the spring. And they have a few demands for us. So I encourage members of council and the public to check out the work that these amazing young people are doing at imaginebarrie.ca. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Worship. I have two announcements. The first one is specific to graffiti. And so wanted to, again, thank residents that have been reaching out. This comes on the heels of media that identified progress Barrie Police had made around convicting individuals that had done some damage to the city,
and quite a bit of it. And
wanted
so
to
we are
again
seeing that
thank
in Ward
residents
3.
that have been reaching out.
Councillor Reed was seeing it.
This comes
in
on the
Ward
heels
1,
of
and I believe
media that
Councillor
identified
Elman
in Ward 2. So my announcement really is a thank you to MP Shipley publicly. We've been having a lot of conversation about what's happening tied to graffiti, but I know city staff have done a lovely job at managing some of the calls and expectations from residents. And as they relate to the Canada Post boxes, there's a bit of that grief and complaint around how long it is taking to get some of the graffiti removed. And so I wanted to publicly say thank you to MP Shipley. I know he and his team have been working with Canada Post around identifying the concerns through the city, and we're trying to take a partnership approach to addressing that. I guess it's a call out to members of council as well as constituents. Considering some areas have been heavily hit in graffiti, and I know usually we look at improving graffiti through bylaw and property standards, but I'm hoping to explore whether or not there is an option to have different considerations in heavy hit areas where a lot of private fences have been tagged, and how can we look at a community cleanup opportunity without putting the burden of the cost of that cleanup to individual residences in some situations, without opening up the doors around changing too much precedent setting. So I'm keen to have that conversation. Would love to identify any ideas that you have, and then maybe connect with staff about what might be possible. My second announcement is, again, we've had kind of a bouncing ball over the past 2 years with COVID for residents on Stoller and Osprey due to an initiative around doing some tree planting in the area. So we are moving forward with a partnership with Living Greenberry. We will be doing a planting to try and replace and look at a beautification approach to the backyards that have seen heavy devastation to the trees that were taken down due to the ash borer beetle. That will be happening the last week in October. I will be reaching out to residents that back onto the ravine and have been impacted. If you haven't reached out, please do so over the next week.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kungel. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I'm really happy we're doing inquiries at 8 o'clock at night. This is a nice change. So I've got a great pleasure of promoting the Rotary Club of Barrie. They've got a Spooky Saturday Family Day, best Halloween contest, kids costume, best pizza, pumpkin carving contest, live music. It's going to be Saturday, October 30th from 11 to 3 at Meridian Place. I'm going to give a $100 donation. If anybody can guess what Councillor Robert Thompson is going to be dressing up as, if anybody wants to jump in on that. But you know what? This is going to be a great event for the city of Barrie. It's down at Meridian Place, and I believe that Councillor Morales may want to add what the BIA is doing, or maybe he wants me to take over. BIA is actually setting up almost like a trick-or-treat session with all the other stores downtown Barrie. So it's going to be a great event that everyone's getting involved in. So I really would encourage everybody to dress up, come down to Meridian Place, and let's have some fun.
Only treats from the BI, no tricks.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Thanks, Councillor McCann. Councillor Natalie Harris, announcements.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just wanted to mention to the public that there's an amazing volunteer group called Ryan's Hope Breakfast to Go, and they are collecting warm blankets and winter clothing, etc. So I encourage you to go to their Facebook page. So it's Ryan's Hope Breakfast to Go. Again, it's a really good page to follow. They've been helping the homeless since, I believe, last February, literally all volunteer basis, outside in the cold in the parking lot of the Salvation Army. And now that the weather is changing, definitely I think there was at least almost 90 people that came for breakfast on Sunday, and usually it goes over the 100 number now. So they're definitely in need of these clothing items. So if you can check that out and also look for what else they're searching for throughout the month, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other announcements? All right, seeing none, I would like to proclaim the month of October 2021 as Toastmasters Month. October 15th is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. October 16th and 17th were RBC Race for the Kids Days, and we're pleased to welcome them to City Hall. That's for RVH, Child and Youth Mental Health. Child Care Worker and Early Childhood Educator Appreciation Day, and October 18th to 24th is Waste Reduction Week. Finally, October 24th is World Polio Day. I want to congratulate the city's Invest Barrie team. Now, we're going to be seeing more on this, I think, next week at Council. I want to congratulate them on being recognized internationally. They won 2 international awards, so we'll hear more about that next week, but I did want to mention it now because there was a media notice that went out there. That's the Economic Development Awards. From the International Economic Development Council, they awarded the city silver for the Support Local campaign and the recovery kits, which members of council may remember at the height of COVID. And the second award was a bronze rank for the launch of the new Invest Barrie website. So we'll hear a few more details on that, but thank you to the Invest Barrie team. And sticking with economic development, the city received a $35,000 grant for a further expansion of the Digital Main Street program. The Digital Service Squad's been just incredible, helping our small expand their online capacity, which of course was absolutely critical for those who had to close, and that was just about everybody for at least a little while, and some who are still going through reduced capacity. And continuing on economic development, it is Accelerate starting tomorrow, actually. Invest Barrie and Georgian College, the Henry Bernick Entrepreneurship Center, are co-sponsoring the 8th Annual Accelerate Summit. It will be virtual from the 19th to the 22nd. Brings business leaders from across the globe, featuring keynote speakers, workshops, pop-up talks, and online networking opportunities. The full conference schedule and experience tickets are available at acceleratesummit.co. The City of Barrie's Performing Arts Center Task Force, ably led by Councillor Jim Harris, is asking for, with support from Councillor Riepma, is asking for feedback from residents to help with the planning process for a new performance facility in downtown Barrie. Residents are encouraged to provide their feedback through an online survey until Halloween, October 31st. This is at barrie.ca/performing arts center. Speaking of Halloween, this year in lieu of the Ghost Bus Tour, which it's too bad we couldn't bring that back just yet, but for the second year in a row, Rec and Culture will be selling Halloween in a bag packages. Residents can purchase for $5, available for online purchase at play.barrie.ca, and available to pick up also at one of the 3 main rec centers. Rec centers will also be offering Spooky Swim and Halloween Skates with costume contests at the centers from October 25th to the 31st. The Spooky Swim will include a deep sea treasure hunt and a pumpkin push contest. One can only imagine. For more information and required advanced registration, please visit play.barrie.ca. Mapleview Drive East from Madeline to Yonge, the construction project that began in July is progressing well, will be leading to upcoming partial road closures up until December 2021. For more information on the project and the timing of those closures, visit barrie.ca/roadwork. It is time for the annual Christmas card art contest. It is now open. You can submit your artwork to my office. The deadline is October 29th for all those who might want to contribute their talents towards the art on the Christmas card for the City of Barrie, barrie.ca/card contest. Simcoe County and the city are teaming up to collect dead batteries. That's in those plastic bags that have been delivered to your households. The 2021 Battery Collection Week, it's right after Halloween, and this helps keep damaging batteries out of the garbage and out of our landfill. So you will be getting bags delivered to households in Barrie the week of October 18th, and you just put them curbside next to the blue box on your regular collection day. There's details online if you need it. Business in the Parks pilot program will be running until December 31st, making it easy for local businesses to offer services and activities during COVID-19. If you do want to book space at Meridian Place, Sunnydale Park, or the Kiwanis Pavilion with what is left of the good weather, please visit barrie.ca/COVID for more information. And the last note about COVID, effective September 22nd, of course, proof of COVID-19 vaccination to access select indoor services and programs taking place at community centres, arenas, pools, and entertainment cultural venues. This is required by the Government of Ontario's proof of vaccination regulations. You can visit barrie.ca/proof of vaccine for up-to-date information. If you are going to particularly our rec centres as a spectator or a player, or to use our facilities. Those regulations do continue to change from time to time from the government, and the city is implementing them, so take a look at the website before you go out. Finance and Corporate Services will be meeting tomorrow at 5 p.m., followed by Planning Committee at 7 o'clock, which includes the Town Hall for the official plan, which will immediately follow a presentation at Planning Committee. Last is circulation list. Any comments on the circulation list from October 7th? October 7th circ list? No. October 18th? Deputy Mayor Ward?
C6, the request from the YMCA to do a presentation, if I could have that.
Thanks very much. Madam Clerk, Deputy Mayor Ward, we can have that as an item for discussion to invite the Y. Any other items off the circ list? Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Worship. Just briefly, I wanted to draw attention to the work happening with the theatre planning, and just wanted to compliment those members of council that are leading that work. I believe it's Jim Harris as chair, Robert Thompson is chairing one of the committees, and forgive me if it's, I believe it's Councillor Riepma is doing the third, but I have been fielding questions from residents about the status of the theatre. Is this really going to happen? This is, something that's quite desired, so it gave me a lot of confidence as a member of council to see how much work and strategy went into that, and that is why I was very happy to support the motion on General Committee's agenda about $5,000, supporting that committee because you've done some amazing work around looking at other sites and options, and I'm excited to see what will come back formally.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. And do I ever feel like a jerk for not mentioning Councillor Thompson when I mentioned Jim and Claire? Thank you as well, Rob, for your work on the committee. Yeah, amazing work. They have talked to, and I know there's been some members who've toured each of 4 facilities in comparable centers, just doing great work so that we get really good information in first-hand sense, not just of what it takes to build one of these, but what it takes to run it successfully, and that is so important. So there is that information. It's A4 on the CERC list, and the opportunity for the public to be involved through the survey. Thanks for that, Councillor Kungle. Anything else on the CERC list? I just wanted to draw attention to A2, which was the report on the financial impact of the tornado. I did see, I think there was media coverage of this item today, but for those who have asked, and many have asked, both in the media and the public, it's not nothing. But it was manageable, and it is certainly not on the level that qualifies for Ontario funding. But due to the great work of our staff and the redeployment of a whole lot of existing resources, I think the financial impact, while not nothing, as I said, to the city between Barrie Police and operations, it's credit to all our staff that they were able to keep the impact to what it was, given the tremendous level of service, I think, particularly the weekend after the tornado. So thank you for that. I also wanted to note, for fun, A3 is the Halloween programming. So not just the deep sea treasure hunt and all the spooky swim stuff that I mentioned tonight. There's other stuff going on. Check out A3 on the circulation list for more information about our Halloween programming coming up. With that, that completes our first in-person General Committee meeting back. Thank you all for tuning in. Sorry about the tech troubles. We will work on that for next week. And members of council, we are virtual tomorrow night for Finance and Corporate at 5 and Planning Committee for all of us at 7. We'll see you then.